Thank you, Fred, and thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Will and Tony and Wilbur here with me. So we've been working on this as a team from the beginning. And yesterday we went through the why we do this kind of work, and how we are supposed to win in this fight against corporate farming and destruction of our ecology and dismemberance of our social structures and impoverishment of our rural economies by the extractive nature of conventional agriculture. So we don't think in terms of projects, we think in terms of systems. Projects are not necessarily systems unless they are designed to do so, to be part of a system. So with that in mind, I will go through some of those notes from yesterday. We'll get a little summary of the why, but we're not going to focus too much on that. We have 1 hour and 45 minutes, so 1 hour and 40 minutes roughly at this session. So I don't want anybody falling asleep. That's the worst thing that can happen in a classroom like this. We'll keep the lights up. If you think you can't see something, we'll just dim them as needed, but let's manage this. And if you feel like you're getting tired, stand up or ask a question. That'll wake you up. And so we'll have more of an interactive session. Yesterday was more of a philosophical and sort of technical, but mostly just sort of a presentation mode, and we had 15 minutes for questions. In this process, when you see something that pops up that really you find could be useful to you in whatever the reason is that you are sitting here today, just raise your hand, we'll stop, and we'll keep going. If we get through all of the slides, great. If we don't, the important thing is that you take home all of the nuts and bolts that you are going to need to assemble some of these things together. Is that good for a framework? All right. So regenerative agriculture, Poultry-Centered, comes to us from a pretty simple purpose. The reason we do this is because there is a need to reinvent, to re-engineer at least one universal agricultural option for all of the small farmers in the world. And unfortunately for us, most of the small farmers in the world, if you look at the United Nations data and all of that on the over 500,000 farmers that produce 70% of the food that we consume today, those farmers are primarily under 5 hectares. That's around 10 to 12 acres of land. So whenever we think of re-engineering a system, you have to think of 2 fundamental factors, and this is some of the stuff we talked about yesterday. Whatever your proposition is, needs to have the largest potential ripple effect. And that ripple effect has to be able to engage people first, the ecology second, and the economy third. That's the order. It's not about taking care of the birds and talking about the birds or talking about the polar bears. That's not how we save them. Is by addressing the reasons and the foundational structures that make people do the things that are destroying their habitat. That's how we save them. You see, so it's about people first. Ecology second is critical because with a good ecological management, you can perform way better economically. But just chasing money doesn't get you a good ecology. That's how we actually have been destroying it, right? So this mission to build a poultry-centered, fully integrated, practical, inclusive, triple bottom line, that's the social, ecological, economic strategy, capable of reorganizing small and medium-sized farms operations to create a large-scale system. Remember, the farm is not a system. Each one of those farmers is a project. But if we aggregate them in a standardized way, globally, we can create a scale at which we can actually outcompete the conventional, not on the basis of how much we sell or what the pricing is, but on the basis of our ecological management principles and structure and engineering. That's what we propose to do. That's our mission. And now we're going to go through how this breaks down into each component. So you know, and you may be familiar with this whole mission, the strategic planning processes where you start with the mission and you move to goals, you move to objectives, and then tactics and so on and so forth. In case you didn't know, that's exactly that's military language. Non-profits didn't invent that. Businesses didn't invent that. It's actually the way you plan a military takeover. Just FYI, in the back of your mind, that would probably bother you enough to keep you awake. So our objectives really, are straightforward and associated and in alignment with that mission. One is to reorganize and transform existing small farms. You will see when we're done today that we know how to do that. And you will also realize that we are making a lot of mistakes in what we're doing today in terms of how we affect those small farms and how we transform small farms. To launch and grow new farmers, we can't just work with the existing farmers. There's loads of people, young people especially, immigrants from rural communities that were displaced by international treaties, trade agreements that remove them from their already scarce land, as we talked before, and now end up in developed countries like the United States, and they can't go back, but nobody wants them here, or at least the powers that be don't want them here either. Yet they are some of the most amazing farmers that could become part of this new global movement, right? So that's why we need to launch and grow new farmers. And in doing that, there's the young people coming out of college, non-immigrants, third, fourth generation individuals who actually start to wake up to the fact that they're going to go hungry unless they do something about it. Or they're going to get sick stuffing themselves with the trash that we are sold today in the name of food, right? So that realization has to be transformed into action on the land. So we can actually get a lot more of those individuals launched on the back of the poultry than on the back of any other livestock that we have available. And in Poultry-Centered, in regenerative planning, you have to start with livestock. There's no ecology in the world that actually can live without animals in it. And if we're going to pick an animal that can change the world, nothing beats the chicken. So just so you align these objectives with that kind of mission and strategy thinking. To integrate poultry-centered enterprise sectors, I will leave that alone because you will see a whole diagram on what those enterprises are and how they integrate. The institutionalization, to engage a scalable solution to poverty and food insecurity. One thing we don't understand in poverty, in food insecurity, is that everything that is being done today has, for the most part, not accounted for the real reason poverty and food insecurity exist in the first place. Those two things are the result not of something that farmers or poor people do or don't do. Is the infrastructure, the dominant infrastructure, from the economics to the extractive nature of large corporations to especially the ownership and the control of the resources that produce the food today, and especially the way we are producing that food that creates poverty and malnutrition. So to solve that, again, it's just like you don't solve the situation of the polar bears by going out there and trying to cool the water. You have to solve the activities of us human beings that are creating the conditions, right? Same thing with poverty and malnutrition. There is plenty of capacity on Earth to produce food for everyone. Nobody should be hungry today. But the problem we have, and the reason it continues to exacerbate, is because we pretend as if we could solve it on the basis of the current systems, production, infrastructure, and engineering. And that is what is impossible. So we have to change that. We'll show you one way to actually influence most of that system with a single entry point, the poultry. And then finally, if we want to do this, we got to institutionalize these ideas, and we have to replace the existing production systems 100%. We can't shoot under that. And that's why most of the ideas out there won't pan out, because you can't scale them up. And if you got an idea that is not scalable, it may be the best idea for your farm, and it may work beautifully for your farm. I got ideas like that too. I'm not talking about them because those are not systems. Those are just ideas that work for me because of my specific social, economic, and whatever conditions I got. Same as somebody else out there with 10 acres, 100 acres, 400 acres, came up with a great idea on how to do something. But unless that was designed on the basis of a system, it's only a farm idea. It's a project. It's not less important just because of that. But we can't talk of that as a system if that is not the case. So that's the last piece of this, and we'll show you how we can actually mathematically calculate on the basis of our system engineering how to replace 100% of how poultry is produced in the world today. Now, if you think we have another idea out there that we could do the same with, please let me know, because we would like to cooperate and combine those ideas so that we can actually win this fight. So let's start with the science. I don't know how many of you are farmers. So you want to raise your hand if you're a farmer? Wow, this is great. About farm professionals, like, I'm both farmer and farm professional. I do consulting and stuff, so you got one. Now, did you know that the foundation of everything you do was established on the basis of thermodynamics? The basic concept is this: energy, you know this, energy cannot be produced or destroyed. It can only be transformed. And what we're in the business of, taking energy from the sun, from the soil, from all kinds of sources, and then manipulating a process that we call farming, so that we can transform that energy from unedible on one end, which you can actually find all its characteristics in the periodic table of elements, moving it to the other side of that equation of thermodynamics, where that energy is now edible in the form of what? Cows, whether it's grass for the cows, whether it's sprouts or grain for the chickens, or whatever it is. At the other end, you can actually pick it up, and molecularly is now in alignment so that we can take it and digest it and get the energy that we need. But if you were to take a chemical profile of that and another chemical profile here, it's the same thing, just the energy that we have transformed. So if you are in the business of transforming energy and you look at what the conventional system has done with the laws of thermodynamics, you will realize one major problem with it, that energy is money. And when most of your energy that you are using in a linear way of thinking, remember, nature doesn't work in linear ways, it works in circles, right? So if you don't integrate points for the energy to continue to be used in a farm engineering process, what you end up with is with a linear design. And in a linear design, which is the foundation of conventional agriculture, you have inputs, you have the process by which you manage those inputs, whether it's seeds, fertilizers, and all of that. And then at the other end, you have an output, which is why we measure efficiency of conventional agriculture on the basis of bushels per acre, because it doesn't measure efficiency, it measures output. Output is not the same. Energy is the measure of efficiency in farming system, because it's about thermodynamics, it's not about output. See, that's why we need to separate ourselves from the traditional idea that we are out there just laboring the land. That's not what we're doing. We are energy transformers. You ever think of that? Now, in a single output system, you're going to have a lot of energy that is wasted. And how we know that? Well, the Gulf of Mexico, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is one place where that lost energy ends up. The atmosphere is another place where the CO2 that comes out of plowing, for example, the methane from the cows and so on, whatever, it doesn't matter what your opinion is about all those things, it's there and it's measurable. 400 parts per million of CO2, for example. Whether it's because cars are inefficient uses of energy or because farmers are releasing it out of the soil, doesn't matter. It's the same thermodynamics, right? So when you do that is when we end up with all of this pollution. But guess what? All of the pollution that we are putting out there is worth money. We paid for it before it came into our land. So if you're going to design a system that is economically viable, you first have to be ecological. I'm not the one who said that. It was Fred Walter's dad. If you look at the books, it says for agriculture to be economical, it first has to be ecological, because that's the order. But I would take it further. Now, this is my quote: for agriculture to be ecological and economic, it first have to meet our social needs, and then it can be ecological, because the ecology is what we make of it. And right now, we're not making much of it. So that's the foundation of that, how that law of thermodynamics is taken and applied in a conventional way of thinking. And I'm just posing that up for contrast, because we're going to go into how we design and engineer. And then you will see the difference. So how do we take these lessons, this knowledge, this science behind it? Dr. Arden Anderson, who spoke 2 nights ago, he didn't speak about any of this. The agricultural consultant, he went into mostly medicine and health and food and all that. But if you read his books, you will find, well, the last one is really the energy and agriculture. And that one, I've gone back and forth like 2 or 3 times, just because this process of engineering has to use real science rather than pseudoscience that is used to fool everybody to think that somehow just because they got 400 bushels per acre, this dude in Georgia or somewhere that won the national corn growers, competition as who's going to get more grain, I think it was 400 bushels per acre, right? So what? If you polluted the river, the water, the people, the animals, and everything else, where is the efficiency of that, right? So, real science. If we're going to talk about chickens and how chickens are going to allow us to get into the backyards of every farmer in the world, every small and medium-sized farmer in the world, start with the chicken, we got to first understand the chicken. Just so you know, chickens are not pasture animals. You will see why. Chickens, number one, they are the closest relative to the T-Rex. That's how little a lot of people know about chickens. Second, they are a jungle folk. They live under the canopy of jungles. They live on the bottom of the jungle. They are one of the most they have some of the most amazing symbiotic relationships with the mycorrhizae, with the mycosphere of the soil, with the ability of supplying the foundational sugars and the carbohydrates, in the form of carbohydrates, for plants to actually generate faster structural supporting systems, cellulose specifically, sucrose and glucose being the foundation of cellulose, as you know, and so on and so forth. So when we put a chicken in an open space, one, it's going to be afraid, it's going to be stressed, it's going to be exposed to more viruses, diseases, and all of that because it's stressed out. As you know, stress is the foundation of a lot of the disease, the way the viruses and diseases get into our bodies. It's going to be is not going to be able to utilize its systems to be able to interact with the natural flows of energy. In a pasture, unless you have perennial pastures like the Kernside and any of those where the chicken can get under because it needs protection from the sun. If you got chickens, you will know they don't go outside when it's really sunny. Well, why is that? Well, even if we don't understand why, all you need to know is that they don't like the open space. Number two, they only eat grasses when they have to, but not as a first choice. If you put all the other foods that poultry are used to and that evolve over geological time to consume, they will never touch the grasses. They will always eat everything else first. It's just no different for us. I mean, if I put you in Guatemala the way I grew up, you will eat what I ate. So let's not do that to the chickens. We domesticated it over 10,000 years ago. The 10,000 is just a number everybody agrees with, but the British Poultry Council actually dates it back to 17,000 years ago. And it doesn't really matter too much. Just what matters is it's been a long time since we have been working with chickens. At this point in time, it's important to know that that white bird that a lot of people grow, that's not a chicken, that's an imposter. Okay, that much we know. The white chicken is an imposter. Chickens don't grow, don't like open space. They are primarily, they are omnivores, but they're primarily carnivores because of their ancestors. So they will eat anything with high protein first. The bugs, they will pick those first. If you put worms in a field and you put all kinds of other things, we'll go first for the worms because that's what the natural instinct is calling for. After that, they will go for sprouts. And they will go for sprouts when they are just about half an inch from the grain. Why? Because they know instinctively that that's when the best nutritional value of the sprout is. And we got the proof of that. Wilbur here, who's an engineer from Zamorano School of Agriculture. We're both from Guatemala. And we are doing now some of that more sophisticated research where we are sprouting different mixes of grains. First we sprouted single grain, corn, and then we sprouted mixes of grains. And now we're getting the nutritional profiles of them. And now we understand why the chicken doesn't like the grass. And will pick the sprouts even if there is grain around. It will leave the grain until it sprouts. Similar to why the squirrel, for example, will take a hazelnut, bury it in the ground 4 to 6 inches deep in the fall, but won't eat it. I mean, you think they are eating them, right? No, they are storing them. But they're not storing them the way you and I think about storage. Okay, let's go to the basement and put a box of things in there. No, like that. They're putting it about 4 to 6 inches underground because they want the heaving and the moisture and the activities of the activity of the microbes and the fungi to break up the shell because they can't do it themselves. And in the spring, what happens? They dig them up, but they dig them up until the sprout comes up, and they dig them up right as the hazelnut is about this far off the ground. Believe me, I lost a whole raised bed of them. And we did it on purpose because we wanted to learn what was going on so that we could replicate and produce hazelnuts at large scale without having to do any of this manipulation. And there's books about how you do this. Well, you just got to look at the squirrels and you'll know exactly what to do. So now we just planted 8,500 hazelnut nuts. That's because that's all we had. But if we had more seed, we'll have planted acres of nurseries because now we know how to do it. And it wasn't the PhD at the U that taught us, it was the squirrels in the field. So, natural energy. How can we manage natural energy so that we can create truly regenerative agriculture systems? That natural energy is truly the foundation of any regenerative approach. Doesn't matter whether it's cattle, pigs, or whatever. I'll tell you this, whenever you hear regenerative agriculture, don't let it become another organic or sustainable washout term. Don't let it go in that direction. Regenerative is not a label. It's a way of thinking. And you can't build regenerative systems yourself. You have to use what was developed over geological time by nature over the last millions of years. That's the only thing that is actually regenerative, because regenerative has to do with the genetic blueprint of the species and how they actually interpret environmental, phenotypical and genotypical information so that they can adapt, thrive, and be resilient. That's what makes something regenerative. Energy is just because energy has always existed for organisms to use so that they can do these other things. Right? So energy is really the foundation. If we screw up the energy cycles and we mess with the laws of thermodynamics like conventional agriculture has done, then we shoot ourselves in the foot again. And we will never see the true potential of the ecology where we live if we don't manage energy properly. So how do we do that? Well, in our case, because of poultry, this is how it goes. So again, now this is engineering. So there is a lot of other stuff that goes around. So if you got chickens in your farm and you also have pigs and cows, well, you better make a whole lot of circles like this because everything processes energy different. Remember, Dr. Anderson also pointed out to the biochemistry pathways. Now, just like we all have one single individual biochemical pathway by which we process toxins and everything, really, because we are a pass-through of everything, energy. So do animals, and so do plants, and so do microorganisms. Some of them group themselves up because they know that their pathways they have to complement each other. And plants are very careful at how they feed those microorganisms so that they themselves create the pathways that lined up with their way of absorbing energy, and so on and so forth. So if you got multiple animals in your farm, just keep in mind that you have to really go deeper into this. But as far as just the poultry is concerned, first, the energy comes in the form of feed. Now this feed, and this is not pointing, so we're not going to use it. So the feed is really, for us, it's important to understand that it wasn't until recently that poultry and other animals were fed ground grains. It didn't exist before, and the productivity was just as efficient, if not more efficient from an energy perspective than what we have today. So ground feed is only necessary because we are trying to intensify productivity. And so we have to bring more energy because there is not enough energy in the space, in the paddocks and all of that for the chicken to fulfill its energy needs. So to the extent that we have to bring new energy in the form of grains and feed, let's focus on grains and less on feed. And this is why we are doing so much research on sprouted mixes of grain, where this energy that we're bringing in can actually be brought in enhanced. So enhanced, what does that mean? Sprouted in the fields, for example. Our grain sprouting system in the field is the most promising. Just so you get an idea, iron. is critical for the health of the animal, for you. This is the basis of eliminating anemia, for example. Is the basis for recuperating after incidents and so on and so forth, where you lost a lot of blood and so on. Now, iron in the grain, the way it comes, is about 29 parts per million. Okay, if we sprouted in the fields where we range the chickens, those 29 parts per million shoot up to 2,900 all the way to 3,800 parts per million. That's the beauty of nature. That's the beauty of energy transformation. Now, what happens then is the sprouted grain, as long as you don't let it grow beyond 2, 3, 4 days after it sprouts, because then it loses it again. But at that point, it's not only present, but if I told you that 2,800 parts per million of iron compounds or component in your diet was coming in the form of ground feed, for example, if you are a nutritionist in poultry, you laugh out loud at me right now because you intoxicate your chickens that way. Now, why do they do better when we do that in a naturally occurring energy cycle? Because molecularly, that iron was in a different form because it was already fed through a magnificent process of microbiological systems, all from fungi to bacteria and chemical interactions and exudations from the plant roots and all of that. The same seed that you sprouted produces exudations so that it attracts the proper microbiology to itself and so on. So because it wants to reproduce and be better than it was before. And in that process, it's going to do these miracles. So you absorb that, you take that, you put it through the chicken, and somehow it's lined up with its biochemical pathways. And it doesn't make it sick, it makes it stronger, more resistant to diseases. Same happens with zinc, similarly happens with carbon. And even in the case of phosphorus, when sometimes the phosphorus goes down, it's actually better because it's not just phosphorus now, it's actually molecular structure so that it is more aligned with the chicken needs. And so on and so forth. This is a never-ending story if you want to think of it that way. So when we take that energy, bring it into the system, keep all of that in mind, because as we raise this poultry, we're going to have new energy coming into that system. Photons, all those geophysical chemical processes that we're talking about. And then if you're looking at a specific ecology, that specific ecology is going to have a whole geoevolutionary blueprint. If you're in the highlands of Mexico, it's going to be one. Midwest is going to be different, and your own place within the Midwest is going to be different depending on what happened on that very space over time. If you're in the Badlands in South Dakota, it's different. That's a very young earth, and so on. So this new energy is going to behave in different ways, but fundamentally, just keep the law of thermodynamics on the back of your head, and whatever you do, you will be able to get it correctly. Because if you interfere less and just feed the system more, then nature will produce bountifully. So once you have that, what we have is a system of paddock-based production where we have chickens roaming inside paddocks that we rotate them into. And in those paddocks, we are planting perennial crops and annual crops and doing all of this sprouting we're talking about. Now, inside those paddocks, we will produce and harvest very specific products. So meat, eggs, hazelnuts, and elderberries. These are 4 products that we extract out of that paddock every year in Northfield, Minnesota. In South Dakota, in the Pine Ridge Reservation, where we have an operation going on there with the indigenous nation, it's going to be meat, eggs. In the future, there will be hazelnuts, and right now there will be choke cherries and buffalo berries, right? In San Miguel de Allende, in Mexico, is olives and 4 kinds of locally evolved fruits. In Guatemala, we're starting with a very tall, 60-foot tall tree that produces this nut that is extremely nutritious, that the Mayans used over 900 years ago, and expands, its geoevolutionary blueprint expands all the way from Oaxaca in southern Mexico to the equator, which means we can use that plant all across that in combination with others so we don't create monocultures, and actually redesign the way we do poultry all the way throughout the whole region. That's what we're talking about. This is not a recipe, it's not a model. It's a way of thinking. It's a blueprint for how you actually optimize the space where you are. It's not about Mexico Northfield, it's about your place. That's the key of the system. Now, inside the paddock, we got all kinds of other byproducts coming out of it. Especially, we got carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, water filtration, soil protection, physical and chemical. If you got physical roots holding your soil, but you also have all of that biophysical process, biochemical process going on. You are both transforming nutrients so that they don't end up as pollutants, rather take them up and put them into fruits and nuts and so on and so forth. And not only that, but now those larger root systems from perennial crops are going to produce a cellulose, wood chips, the proper temperature and humidity under the canopy so that the chickens won't suffocate when it's hot, and so that sprouts would keep sprouting no matter what, even if when you have droughts, because the temperature on the soil level will stay at around 70 degrees where it needs to be. The humidity, capillarity water is going to be able to recharge the surface because you got a lot of organic matter there to hold it. Up to 11% organic matter is what you're going to be looking at. Forget about this improving from 2% to 5%. You can go all the way to 11. There's no need to compromise with nature. Then you're going to have excess energy. Yeah, you extracted all this energy, you harvested it, you marketed it at a good price because you can make significant, solid claims about how this poultry is better. I got to tell you, our eggs are the best. It doesn't matter what you think, they're still the best. Because I'm also a marketer, so I can't tell you otherwise. And if you're a marketer, your eggs will be the best. It doesn't matter what I think about it or what anybody else thinks. And when you start believing that and doing this, you communicate that. Nobody who's in front of you, who's now getting emotionally connected with you because you know these are the best eggs and you can tell them why and all of that, is going to walk away without a dozen eggs. And they will pay more. That person will pay more if they really appreciate nutrition and real food. And we have that phenomena going over and over for us. So that excess energy, what happens to it? We can't let it go just anywhere. So giblets, feathers, manure. The paddocks, what happens is the paddocks is where the chickens are during the day, under the protection of the canopy and all that. But at night, when they relax, they clamp their claws, right? So that they hold on because they evolved in the jungle, so they sleep on trees. That's why you have to have purchase in a regenerative poultry unit. You have to have purchase, otherwise you are compromising the chicken because the chicken is not used to sleeping on the floor. Now, when it relaxes, guess what else it does? It poops and all that, and that's when it's going to defecate the most. So a lot of your manure, that's why you never overload the paddocks, because most of the manure ends up in the shelters, which means it's excess energy that you now can capitalize on to start a whole new process of biotransformation where you can then develop non-paddock based production, meaning where the chickens are not going to roam, and now you can go wild on what you can do with new harvests such as alley-cropping vegetables, perennial vegetables, nut crops, fruit crops, silent grains, perennial grains, and all that. And guess what? If you sell inputs for organic farmers, don't take it personally, but we don't need you. We have not bought an ounce of fertilizer in 8 years. And guess what? Our hazelnuts, we are outproducing the cultivars at the universities by 4 to 6 times. From 0.25 pounds of actual nuts that they have recorded as harvest, we are now averaging 2.7 to 2.75 pounds per bush. Now, with zero inputs outside, energy inputs outside from what I just described here. But not only that, you get some of that grain, you fix your income because now you got multiple incomes coming out. One of those is the chicken itself. That's why I said it's not about the chicken, it's about re-engineering and building regenerative systems. The other thing is that all of this production is marketable, or you can put it right back so that you can produce something that is marketable. So whether you take this and make biochar, and then you take that biochar and put it into nut production or vegetable production, you're still taking that energy that came in the form of feed and moving it through so that you can put it over here and then you harvest it. Maybe you don't sell it right here, but you sell it over here, or you sell it over here. At the end, or you take that grain and then you, instead of buying more feed, you take that feed and eliminate some of that feed and put your own grain into it. Now you're taking the energy that you brought in at the beginning and recycling it back in the form of wheat or whatever else you grew. Now, if this is why for agriculture to be economical, it first has to be ecological. Because otherwise, you're stuck with a single output. In a single output, myopic way of engineering, linear way of thinking, misunderstanding of the laws of thermodynamics, you shoot yourself in the foot every single time you get on a tractor. Now, building a farm production system isn't the same, like I said before, as building an actual agricultural system. A farm is not a system, it's a project. It's a place where you do certain things that also need to happen multiple times, many hundreds of thousands of times for it to become a system. And you as a farmer are not going to do that. You're going to do that as part of some sort of community that you're a part of. And that's where the enterprise design comes in. To design enterprises that are systematically delivering for that farmer that is doing these things we just talked about, you need to start with principles. No different than when you're marrying someone. If you are in misalignment in principles, you're not going to get very far. Resiliency is the beginning because that is the ecological. Sustainability is second because that's purely about economics. Remember that for something to be resilient, we just talked about this, resiliency is the result of billions of years of geoevolutionary events, events over geological time that created the evolutionary blueprint by which organisms can adapt, interpret phenotypical and genotypical characteristics so that they can actually respond to it and change themselves accordingly and continue to evolve and adapt and so on. That's the definition of resiliency. Sustainability, on the other side, just has to do with being able to do something for a long time. And under that definition, war is one of the most sustainable activities of humankind. Just say it. Don't confuse magnesium with gymnasium. They're not the same. Transparency, because we have to know what's going on, otherwise we can't participate and build communities. Fair, because nobody should be taken advantage of. Whether it's a worker in the restaurant or in the farm, or a farmer selling to a distributor, or a distributor selling to a restaurant, nobody should be taking advantage of anybody. There is enough to go around for everyone. And then healthy, because if I'm a worker on a farm, I want to have a healthy environment. If I'm a chicken on a farm, I want to have a healthy environment where ammonia is not overloading my lungs, or antibiotics are overloading my system, and so on and so forth. And if I'm a farmer, I want to have a healthy relationship socially and ecologically with my animals, also with the people I work with the neighbors and all of that, right? So if I'm a consumer, I don't want to be consuming chemicals. I want to be consuming glyphosate and all of those things that are now so common in our foods. So healthy is really the whole circle again. Now with those principles, then we can move on and say, okay, how can we narrow that into three fundamental bottom lines, starting with the social. And the social is back again because every farmer in the world can grow poultry, different from other kinds of livestock. I'm not saying that other livestock are not good in certain places. Like, for example, cattle. Cattle is great in places where the earth actually designed systems for cattle to thrive. But what the heck are we doing putting it in the rainforest of Brazil, in the Amazon? I mean, just think about the fundamental stupidity of any rational engineer or extension or professional suggesting something like that. I mean, it's so professionally offensive to think that we can rationalize professionally that kind of attitude. Just to give you a sense, and I hope you connect with me, in how frustrating it is to be in this world doing this work, knowing that there is so much being done to undo everything we're doing. And undo it for no reason except greed, ownership, and control of your lives and the lives of all of these indigenous peoples who have lived in that land for so many hundreds of years. So I don't understand that. I understand it intellectually. I don't understand it from a human purpose of living standpoint. So that's why the social is the beginning. If we change that, then we can manage the economic and the ecological on the basis of that engineering we just described. Now, if we're going to do that, then we're going to start by building prototypes. These prototypes are not really complicated. This is where you come in. Since most of you are farmers, I have said a lot of stuff that maybe goes right over your head. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to impress you, okay? That's all. Or maybe I didn't because all I said, maybe you are already, turning in your head. But the critical thing is, these are hazelnuts. This is the Midwest. Hazelnuts are native to this ecology. They evolved over time to be absolute miracles of nature in this region. We don't need the Portland hazelnuts, the Turkish hazelnuts, the Spanish hazelnuts. We don't need any of that. We got our own, and it is the one that does better in these ecologies. Now, this is why we are producing at the levels that we are producing. Now, second, we have corn here because this is not your feed corn, any of that. This is tortilla corn, high lysine, solid starch that we can actually make tortillas with because we are also about food security for ourselves. But if you combine this with the hazelnuts, what happens? The hazelnuts, their root systems will expand 7.5 feet in each direction, creating a 15-foot umbrella, inverted umbrella, to capture all of the nutrients from the chickens that are living under. Number two, the height of the hazelnut equals the depth of the root systems, all the way from 12 feet to 15 feet in depth. Which means it doesn't matter how much nutrition we put here. It would always be extracted on its way down, picked back up, turned back over. In the fall, when the leaves fall, that energy, those nutrients go back into the paddock here on the surface, and the chickens will harvest it next year. That's why the iron and all of those other nutrients are so high. When we take the sprouts and we say, how can we harvest this energy and make it available as food for the chicken? Well, the sprout is the only way to actually do that efficiently. Efficiently, again, meaning thermodynamics, meaning energy transformation, right? So, and then on this side we got the sunflowers, and we put this photo, Will did, because he knows how to support what I want to say. Because those are two crops that we can intercrop in alleys between the hazelnut rows. But right under here, there's also elderberries, because those also can go alternating, and that way you create underneath a massive support system that does all of those things that we talked about before, but also cycle those nutrients. And on the other hand, as the roots rot and all of that, creates the infrastructure so that it doesn't matter how much it rains, there will be room for that water to go down. And then, most importantly, than the water being absorbed, the retrieval process. If you know about water cycles, you will know about capillarity water. Now, capillarity water is what causes deserts. Because after it rains, the sun comes out and the water rushes back out. If you were on Mark Shepard's presentation, you will know what that does to clay soil, for example. Now, that will never happen when you have these levels of mulch and organic matter, because you will have all of the worms and all of the invertebrates and vertebrates going up and down and the root systems rotting out, and then they will use those channels to go down and create more and more. And so when the water comes down, it just goes down into all of that microtubular infrastructure and micro. And when the sun comes back out, because the temperature won't change like that, because your soil is protected, it will slowly warm up. But because you don't have exposed soil, you got organic matter there. What would happen to that water once it starts coming up? It just recharges the surface 6 inches. And guess where you want that water? That's exactly where you want it. Because now it recharges all of the nutrients, creates the bondings and the bridges so that then the biochemical process can start, and those nutrients now can be absorbed by the sprouts, and boom, you got a superfood for the chickens. And all of this it sounds complicated when you look at it, the whole thing, but it's just really about going out there, making sure you got straw under there, throwing out a lot of the grain mixes that we have prepared, and just letting them sit there for 3 days, and then letting the chickens out on that side of the paddock, on that paddock, when they're ready or are done with the other paddock. So this is what it looks like. This already, the sunflowers are harvested. By the way, those sunflowers then got turned around and given to the chickens. We didn't take a single sunflower head out of this space this year, because luckily we had Wilbur managing this, and I think it was 2 weeks that he spent with the other volunteers, cutting the flowers, flipping them, and I hope we can show you a video at the end. They go crazy. Not only that, but sunflowers are some of the most nutrient-rich options, grain options for the animals. Protein contents, I believe, is around 43%. So during those days, we went from feeding the chickens 0.25 pounds a day, which a quarter of a pound, which is what every chicken laying eggs, medium and large size, should be fed, down to between 0.10 and 0.15 pounds. So we can eliminate from 25 all the way down to 35, 40% of the ground food that we're bringing in. And we haven't yet started talking about sprouts. Now, if you think about what strategically is most important in poultry-centered, large-scale system, is the feed. And if you can now start to figure out ways to eliminate, even if you just eliminate 25% of that feed, you got the industry running, guaranteed, because they can't even change 1 gram anymore. They maxed everything out because their systems are energy inefficient. And that is how we make our system competitive. It isn't about the price of the eggs. That's not what we're talking about. It's about the engineering. So, like you saw here, there's a building, and there's 2 paddocks here, though you don't see the fences right there. That paddock is one, and then they come on this side, and then they run all the way down the building, and they go to the very last corner of this paddock. Fundamentally, there is a shelter in Minnesota and the north climate because of the winter conditions. We have a solarium where we continue to do that sprouting, and we continue to feed them some of that. And we can go into that if you want to, how we are sprouting and what kind of methodology we're using, because since you can't do the field sprouting in the winter, we still can enhance and enrich the mixtures, but it's not the same as when we can totally optimize the outdoor productivity. So the fence got a silo for food, and then water coming in there, and two areas, so doors on this side, doors on this side, that you can lock up when you want them on this side, and then you can lock this and let them out this way, manage them alternating. And we started with 4 paddocks way back in 2007. We reduced it to 3, and then we realized that 2 was the optimum, and the reason mostly is because we are just as interested in the energy efficiency of the system as we are interested in not working. If you gotta work too much, just go to sleep for a while, let it go away, and then come back and try to figure out how not to work. Farming isn't about working. It's about producing energy, transforming energy. Remember that? Every time you go out to the field, if you're working too much, you're probably not using nature the way it intended for you to work with it. So, and then there will be work. We work really hard, don't take me wrong. We don't sleep all day. But the key is not to be spending energy and your labor on things that could be done otherwise. You can go from a unit of production, which is one of these little frames here. This is what we're working with. This is Regeneration Farms. It's our first 42-acre independent private farm. We are partners with Tony, Will, and myself in that company. Tony is our CEO, Chief Operating Officer. Will is the master communicator. And the objective is to deploy 5 production units. These 5 production units with its own egg processing facility, an egg processing facility that can process about 18 of these farms. This will produce roughly 2.1 million eggs. Average of in 10 acres, we can gross around $948,000, and produce all of the energy that we need for all of the alley cropping in the rest of the farm, including these 10 acres and this acreage right here. These are bands of perennial crops that we are putting, and in between is the alleys where we're going to put grains and we're going to put vegetables and other things. But these curves are made on contour so that we put all of those systems that we're talking about, water, that Mark Shepard's talking about, all of that is integrated into this. Everything out there that has been figured out, we're bringing it back and putting chickens in the center of it. Wait for him to take a picture. You can have the whole slideshow. This is what it looks in real life. That was the design. This is actually planted. Mark Shepard came in and contributed 19,000 hazelnuts, and we planted, day in and day out, 4 days in a row in the spring. Some of them even flowered this year. Now, how do you go from all of this and actually scale up in a way that you can mathematically calculate what you're doing, plan it like you were about to take over the world, and be able to break it down so that the individual who is going to deploy their farmer to take over the world knows exactly how they themselves play a role in the overall system. Remember, if you work as an isolated farmer, you are going to be easy to pick apart by the industry, to push aside and all of that. The only way we can do this work is if we build systems where we come together, even if we dislike each other. In fact, that was the line in the indigenous region in Southwest Colombia, because they got their conflicts too, all indigenous and everything, but different conflicts. And not only that, but they don't work with the campesino community, which is huge in Latin America. And I said, well, why are you shooting each other instead of just looking to the real enemy? So I said, okay, let's not deal with why you do that. Let's understand why you do it and the fact that you do. And now let's figure out, can the poultry bring you together? And the regional spiritual leader, at the last day, we were sitting with the campesino organizations and the indigenous leadership, and said, there's one thing that I realized in this week that we spent together. And he said, that we actually can come together despite our differences. And the poultry can do that. Because that unites, it goes across the board. If somebody was doing cattle, the other one was doing pigs, and the other one was doing poultry, and so on and so forth, and that would create a whole bunch of new layer of divisions. But this way, focusing, like an enterprise is supposed to do, yet diversifying it, so that we are not just doing one thing, but also not trying to do everything at once. Now think about those things. It sounds contradictory, but no, it's not, because it's poultry-centered. And we start with the eggs, we start with the meat, but you can't just have meat production and not process it. You can't just have egg production and not process it, right? So it's a natural evolution. It's a way of connecting again on the enterprise design, the same thing we did on the energy flow design. And then you got grain processing because you need food, and you're not going to let this be part of someone else, because if you let it to be part of outside of the system, they will choke you out. In fact, not even 40 years ago, in the United States, Purina would poison the feed for farmers who were growing too strong and could potentially start controlling their own grain. Look up your data and you will find those stories. In Guatemala, 2 years ago, my brother's brother-in-law grew enough meat chickens that he was getting to a point where he could potentially set up his own silos and start grinding his own feed, which some of the cattle ranchers are already doing. So he started getting them together. Purina poisoned 100,000 broilers and took him out of business. And it was poison. Okay, there's a farm right by the city, Guatemala City. It's called Tierra Nueva. Tierra Nueva had their water system poisoned. They had to actually put fences and guard dogs so that the industry wouldn't come and poison their water. Okay, just so you understand, we are really playing with fire, even though it has feathers. So we must control this part as a system, you guys and us. Otherwise, forget it. It's very easy to just come and choke you out. Remember, some of the greatest enterprises or empires in the history of mankind went belly up, lost control because they lost control of their food supply systems. Napoleon said it a long time ago. The Romans and the English actually had troubles because of that. And today it seems like we're going in the same direction. It's energy again. Grain production then can be lined up on the basis of that system of alley cropping that we were talking about. And now we can transform the whole landscape instead of just being those small units we were talking about. We can then manage that manure for that grain production and also for the production of other kinds of things that ensure our food security. It's not the USAID that is going to fix that. Believe me, they never intended to, and they will never do that. And it isn't Bill Gates with his chicken idea that is going to change this. It's going to be when we actually learn how real revolutions and real systems are actually designed and engineered. And on it goes to the point that we can connect over 14 separate enterprise sectors. And that's where the economic sustainability comes from. We don't win economically because somehow we sell our products at a super price or a premium or whatever. Maybe we do that too, but shouldn't be the objective. The objective should be integration, both on the farm and as a system. Both together are completely invincible. That's why we always lose against the industry, because they have the system figured out themselves for a whole different purpose, yes, but this is how they organize themselves. Which one is the most vertically integrated industry in the world? Poultry. The most aggressive, the most polluting, the most exploitative, the more abusive, all of those things. But why are they so effective? Because they know how to organize systems. Why the heck haven't we done that in our own world? When we have all these conferences and we talk about it, why can't we just go and do it? It's actually much easier. So this is our example of how we scale up. First of all, you need business processes for everything we're going to do. So our business process is simple. The prototype unit, we did that. Farm level unit, we've done that. Regional system means bringing all the farmers in the region together within a geographical blueprint, so we're not spending fuels and all of that, transporting things back and forth to whatever. If we need production for Lincoln and Omaha, since they are close enough, let's put a system in between. And just save all of transportation to Des Moines. We need Des Moines production in Des Moines, let's put a system right there. There's farmers there too, you know. In Minnesota and Chicago and wherever you want to go, we don't need to ship food around. So that's the way we have the regional as part of that blueprint. And then institutionalized, meaning the University of Nebraska and Lincoln, and Omaha, and U of M, ISU, all of those institutions need to start teaching this. But right now, I go and tell them that, and they just kick me out, laugh at me. But now, how about all of you, and all the people who came last year to the presentation, and all of the folks at Practical Farmers of Iowa, how about if we were all deploying a system, and we all go and tell the university they got to teach this? Guess what they will do? They will start teaching it. And what if we also say, and we also want Reginaldo teaching some of this, and Wilbur and Tony and Will and you and everybody else, and we want you to pay them too, because that's what we want our USDA money to go to. Well, they will have to do it too. As an individual, you will never get there. As an individual, I'll never get there. That's why we have to think in terms of systems. And then we can do this part. We're doing some of it now, because obviously they're interested in this kind of work. There's people that are already helping out. But we won't really win until we figure our own stuff out. So southeastern Minnesota is where we are now concentrating. This region here is about 5 counties north of Rochester, south of the suburbs, Highway 52 connecting all of us, and 35 on this side. That gives us a really defined geographical target to focus on. The potential there, if we want to take 5% of the Minnesota egg and meat market, is about 5.78 million meat birds and around 66.66 million eggs. All right, so this is what I said. We can replace the conventional industry. It's a mathematical calculation now. Once you know how you're going to grow things and all that, then just go and calculate it. So how does it work? You know, in this case, based on the size of a family farm, we need 153 of them. We need 260,000 laying hens at 70% productivity ratios, although right now we got about 95% productivity with the system. So we may even need less than that. We need 819 acres in production units, the ones that I showed you before, and around 3,000 acres of indirect related land for energy management and other kinds of non-paddock based production. This gives us a total of $34.11 million of farm gate impact and around 3,500 acres of landscape impact, meaning landscape that it would be completely regenerated in the basis of that design. In contrast, if we were to take that same impact we're talking about and compare it to what we get out of corn and soybeans, it's about 1 to 10 ratio. We can produce around $4.284 million worth of output of corn and soybean in that same space, and end up with all of the social, ecological, and all of that other cost. This is why we always end up losing money when we do this. Even if the farmer himself or herself ended up with some profit, we lost money every time somebody harvests corn and soybeans, because our ecology is not designed for that kind of productivity. So, the institutionalization, just to walk home with some of these ideas, is to integrate, to track and report, to certify either by existing systems or a new regenerative certification, and to integrate with established institutions. It's pretty straightforward. Wherever we go, this is the same kind of checklist. We got to do all of those things once the system gets deployed. And that allows us to go anywhere in the world without ever reinventing the wheel. Right now, we're doing that in South Dakota. We've got our center in Minnesota. The Mexico operation is already delivering eggs in the Mexico City and all that. And it's centered in a place where we can train well over 1,500 small farms in there. It's got a processing facility for grain of 29 million pounds. So we can support about 80 small producers in that area and so on and so forth. The Guatemala system, we started by creating a cooperative of farmers, and now we just bought 4 hectares to put the training center, and now we're going to move into that same path that we moved in Mexico. Same thing we're doing in South Dakota with Pine Ridge. We're also exploring right now a partnership with Zamorano School of Agriculture, with our manager in Mexico comes from, where Wilbur comes from. And so we can actually deploy a training center at the university so we can start that process of institutionalization. One thing that has been interesting is that whether it's Haiti, Guatemala, or Colombia, where we are now training teams, it's way faster than anything we have done in the US. It's taking us 8 years to get to a place where we actually have some production here. It took us about 6 months in Mexico. And we are producing about 4 times as much as we are producing in Northfield. It took me about 3 hours on the phone to convince a team of 11 professionals in Colombia to come in for a whole week of training and to go and reorganize everything they were doing on poultry to line up with our system. Now imagine what it would take to get all the professionals on agriculture in this country to line up on our system. Gosh. I can't even get a couple. I mean, that's why Wilbur which is such a blessing, because he came trained and he was ready. It was like, why is not more people doing this, right? So, anyway, just so you walk home with some sort of something to think about. The nuts and bolts again. Profile, we can profile a specific unit by looking at what startup needs there are and what kind of marketable outputs a production unit will deliver for you right from the start. We can speed this up, we can slow it down, we can do a lot of things as management is concerned. But at the end, you still have the same result. The shelter, again, is critical in cold climate. The solarium is even more critical in cold climate, so that the birds can have a space where they are protected and where you can manipulate the heat a little bit. Not that you have to do a lot of it, because chickens are very happy at about 40, 45 degrees, just above freezing. We actually completely dismantled that whole manual from the suppliers of chicks that say you gotta keep the temperature and all of those things. Well, we tried many different ways, and we lose less birds now under our system than we lost when we were doing exactly what the industry said. So we can go into that when you get trained to deploy the system. But this is critical. The doors are critical because in the dividing line here, so they go out this way and they go out this way. even in the winter when it's 45, 40 degrees or whatever, if there's not a lot of snow, then they can go outside and still roam a little bit. The thing with the snow is that they like to eat it, but they try to fly over it, and when they do, they float on the snow, and then they go like this and just make a hole, and they just sit there and they can't do anything. We found that the wrong way. And then that building is within that unit, as we talked about. One unit for meat poultry is around 1.5 acres. You take that and you put 1,500 flocks, bird flocks in it, and you can put 3 or 4 flocks, depending on whether you have what we call the broodery unit. A broodery unit allows you to grow the birds up to a point and then move them into the production unit, because otherwise the production unit sits there idling for 4 weeks and the weeds and everything just takes off, right? Well, you want the birds controlling that. You don't want to be weeding. And so to do that, you can line up the production and the brooding part somewhere else because they are inside anyway, so it doesn't matter. But you don't want to be moving them from farm to farm. You don't want to be transporting your birds to his farm, because in the stress and all that will kill you, a whole bunch of them, and it will just slow down their growth. It will do all kinds of things to them. But if you have a farm size and you want to do more birds than just 2 or 3 flocks, then you can grow up to 5,200 with a broodery associated with your meat birds. Now that means, at $3.25 a pound, which is what we sell them right now, we are averaging $65,910 of gross production per 1.5 acres. This is 7 years of doing this. So it's no longer theory or anything like that. Now we also produce hazelnuts in the same space, and elderberries and so on. So we estimated another 3,000 for a total of $72,700 per 1.5 acres. That's why we can do $74 million on 3,500 acres. Not because every acre produces you the same, because the alley cropping systems outside of the paddocks where we can get more value will do less. But this is where the fair trade whole set of principles come in, because then you even it out by working as a system instead of as an isolated thing where everybody's going to try to grab something more from everybody else. That's how we chew each other out. That's not how we build a system that is resilient. So this farmer is now going to have manure, is going to need grain, is going to need processing, and on starts to move the equation, right? In the meat poultry, if you can we calculated 8 production units. This is 1.5. So just around 12 acres, really, not 8.64. Gotta update that. These are correct, and these are correct because the square footage outside, about 15 square feet of ranging area and 1.4 to 1.5 feet of shelter area per bird gives you a really good regenerative factor in the Midwest. That's completely different if we were doing the same talk in Mexico, for example. It's about half as much, so twice as much space, half as many birds to get to a 1/4 regenerative factor. And we could go through the formulaic process by which we calculate that regenerative factor. You will see very science-based and can be tracked and all of that. Now this means we can produce in one farm roughly $486,000 worth of gross income. Now we never get into time to tell people how much profit they're going to make, because if we took all of you here and we all started one of these operations, we all will end up with different profits. The reason is because profits is the result of management, not the result of an enterprise design. And all of us will manage this differently. And that's the foundation of profits. The foundation of the system is different. Now, if you look at egg layers, it's a whole different animal. Totally different. You can't put egg layers and meat birds alternating. Number one, we need more space because we can put up to twice as many egg layers in a paddock-based system because of just simply the way they roam. They're so different foragers, or foragers, because we provide them with a forage in the form of sprouts, so they can forage in that during the day. And so we need more doors for them to get out, so they don't pile up and injure themselves. We need more space so they can have the same requirement. So we meet the standard of our own standard of spacing, inside and outside. And we need other kinds of infrastructure because they lay eggs. And so they lay eggs. We need the the systems for them to have at least a two-tier laying system. We also need a separate area on the back of every building so that when you are harvesting eggs, you are never entering the coop. That's a very big mistake from a biosecurity standpoint. You got to design biosecurity into the units. You can't deal with it later if you design a non-secure place. So the design and all of that is critical. There is that, of course, that you collect the eggs on this side. You can clean this area every day, and you can have this connected to the processor if you have one unit or two, or you can just connect this to pods, and then those pods go into the processor, whether it's on your own farm or we are part of a region that has one main processor. We all bring our eggs there. It doesn't matter. The building will allow you to do all of those things. You don't have to change a thing. Critical thing then is the environment. Just like we built an environment outside for the chicken that is lined up with the chicken, the environment inside, the egg laying, the purchase and the distances and all of that to meet the characteristics and the behavior of the chicken. The purchase here so that they can sleep off the ground, the linear feet per bird that is required so that they all get a perch to perch on, and so on and so forth. All of this can be calculated very easily. We've got photos that we have taken in the middle of the night just to see how they stock themselves and how many per foot and all of that, and we came up to a similar conclusion than the standards that exist today. We also took the 7 main standards in the world, we consolidated them into one, and we make sure that we either met all of the world standards of today or we exceeded them, and most of the time we exceed them. Just so you know that this is not just like pieced together right there, no, all that. No. This is like everything poultry out there, it's already on the system. This is a unit in Mexico, just to give you an idea. They use this rock that if you grind it and you get wet, it hardens for floor. But also if you harvest it together with the manure, it actually increases the calcium content and all that. So it's actually a good mix with the manure, and it takes care of any minor odor that may develop because it takes care of the humidity, which is the foundation of why the odor happens in the first place, and so on. This is how they created their doors because they need continuous flow of air. They created this ventilation out here so that there is good. And then on the other side of the building, there's another egress for the air, so that there is cross ventilation all the time. Because this is thin roof, if it heats up, the heat never reaches downwards because it's always being removed naturally because it's a siphon, right? So anyway, and then this is adobe. This is sheet metal. This is metal structures rather than wood like we did in Minnesota, but the specs are the same.
You have access to the door there, the roofs?
So again?
Do you have manure accumulation?
Oh, inside the building, yes. They will be defecating there every day, and then when it gets tall enough, we'll remove it. The British only remove it when they are done laying eggs. They let them they lay the manure all the time. Till they're done, they only clean them once. So we don't want to do that because that requires that we put slat floors and about 2 feet high, and then they poop in there, and that's how they keep the smell from their coops don't smell either. And the reason is because there's dry manure under, it's not wet. And so, but that means the chickens are stepping on plastic slat floors. And the standards of the humane standards call for more natural space for them to stand, so we chose that option instead. So we could meet that standard. In some cases, like this, even exceed it a little bit. But the manure accumulates in there, and then we remove it, bring it out to the fields. In our case, we're doing that. Anytime sometimes the drinkers, they will spill water or whatever, and we end up with a little bit of smell. The key is that you could go in there all the time and you manage it so that there is no ammonia accumulation. And that's mostly removing it, keeping it dry. The nice thing with egg layers is that they roam a lot longer, up to 300 feet. So we can make the units narrower, wider. We can play a lot more with the egg layers than we can with the meat birds. The profile of the egg layer, we are using 2.2 acres, so 1 hectare per production unit, because they would roam that far. But we can make them smaller. The key is if you make the unit smaller, the flock is going to be smaller. The ratios can't change. Space per bird, outside and inside. And then the building has to be narrow and long to create the surface so they can go in and out during the day, the morning and in the evening. If you make it square, for example, that building is not going to allow for that surface area and so on. It's a lot of details like that, but all you need to know is the dimensions. And if we were to consult for you, for example, look at your place and within half an hour we can have you decide, because they're all the same. But if you produce eggs in one of these units, you're looking at 3,500 hens producing about 79,000, 80,000 dozen a year. We are selling them, way more than this. But if you are selling them at 220, 250, or 325, 350, you can be ranging, from 200,000 unwashed to almost 300,000 washed, ready to deliver. Our prototype unit that we showed you at the beginning, we have a wash station right there, so that we are producing eggs ready for the store. We are authorized by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and all that. We are exempt because we only have 325 hens in the unit, the prototype training unit. And any flock under 3,000 hens in Minnesota is exempt from all kinds of other regulations. Although the regulations are not really a problem right now. We can meet those, and that's what Tony's in charge of. He's a food systems engineer, and if you've got any questions, he can answer them for you on that level. But the basic thing is that if you look at this, we can produce an aggregated value of over $200,000 of gross income per every hectare of land that we engage. This is what makes it compatible with small farms, is that you're not talking about small production, yet you're talking about small acreage. And you're not talking about overloading nutrients. Now, if you just got, say, 1 hectare and you want to do this very thing, we better make sure that there is a farmer who's doing vegetables and other things so they can use the manure. Otherwise, you're going to end up with it. And there is no room here to put it back into the paddocks, because then you will overload your own system, right? So just keep that in mind if you got 2 or 3 acres. And so maybe you want to do a smaller unit and then use your own space for managing the manure, and we'll calculate that based on what you're going to grow there, the nutritional profiles, demand in the case of the crop, and the nutritional profile of the manure, which is what you're going to be supplying for energy. Right? Now, if you look at 5 production units like we were doing in the Regeneration Farm, you're really looking at from $950 to $1.3 million per farm, and 5 production units at 12, 15 acres. That's what we were talking about. Yes?
About how much labor is required for that one production unit?
Well, I'll tell you a story instead. So I've grown a lot of these animals because I had to do it to get trapped out. So for meat birds, we're talking about 100 hours. It took me less than 50 hours to do the same thing. And we had this fellow who came over who wanted to volunteer. It took him over 200 hours. But, like for example, I said, well, when I got the bags of feed, because we're still feeding them with bags, well, I just extended the roof of the coop in the front. And I just covered it, put it off the ground so the mice won't get it, put it right there, and I was just transporting it 8 feet. Well, when he took the delivery, he put it all the way on the other side of the barn, and I said, what the heck? That by itself just added another half an hour of work and a broken back and I don't know what else, Again, the labor is management. But we're putting augers now, so we don't even have to do that. Most of the labor is collecting the eggs, most of it is harvesting and putting sprouts out in the field and keeping that managed. Because sometimes, a hazelnut will grow a branch that they grabbed onto and they will lower it. You want to go cut it because it becomes a contamination point. They start perching and pooping in there. They will do the same to our sunflowers. We are walking in there with a short machete and just managing that. We're talking about 10 minutes a day maybe. Sprouts, that's going to take about an hour to coat the whole paddock sprouted. But, that's if you go around with a bucket or wheelbarrow. Well, what we did, we bought a little subcompact tractor and 600-pound hopper, And now we just go back and forth with it. And in like 5 minutes later, we have spread 600 pounds, and half an hour later, we have done a half an inch of grain in this field. And then we still come back and put straw over it by hand. But then I figured out that there's a machine that can just shoot the straw like they do in the highways. So even that is going to become no labor. So it's one thing right now is going to change again and change again, and maybe you figure out a new way, and then you teach us all of us a better way to do the labor. So that's the story behind the labor. There is no fixed numbers in nature. Let's just put it that way. This is the solarium. They got water in there because it's critical for them to have water no matter what. Chickens can go without food, but not without water. The buildings are pretty straightforward, dimensional, lumber and all that. So this is the solarium in one of the meat bird units. This is a solarium with steel trusses. Same back, same thing, same space, all that. This is 18 feet, 32 feet all the way across, and then this one is 40 foot long. And because it's only for meat birds, we don't need as many doors because there's only like up to 1,500 of them in there. This solarium has inside the solarium there's this area where we put polycarbonate sheets so that the sun reaches all the way in. And they always exposed to sun, no matter whether it's winter or summer. The birds come in, they spend 4 weeks inside. Once they are grown up enough and the hawks can grab them by the dozen, then they go outside. While they're inside, the outside is being managed. In this case, this is like 4 or 5 years ago. You see the hazelnuts, how small they were. All of this is now filled up. But this was the first time we tested the sunflowers. So they are growing while the chickens inside are growing. By the time they are coming out, the hazelnuts already the elderberry sunflowers already created a thick canopy, which we are now calculating and evaluating with drone overflies because they react the same to drones as they react to hawks. So we can actually get very scientific about that in terms of canopy structure so that we know transparency and all that. But the chickens really love taking care of the undergrowth to the point that they really leave it nice. There's still green in there, and there's sprouts in there. But there's no weeds, and the sunflowers just load up like crazy. We had a sunflower in this case that was 24 inches in diameter. This is 12 feet high. Let's look at this sunflower. When it rains, we dance because after that comes regeneration, massive, and the chickens just go nuts over this stuff. Look at the size of the stems of this sunflower. We had 3 and 4 inch stems. And of course, how would a bird not grow healthy and great and robust and great tasting and all that?
What's the bird breed?
These are the J77, I think is called, from the Sasso genetic company in France. And now they are distributors. I think Whelp is distributing their genetics too. It's not the traditional red broiler that Whelp was selling. The red broiler was just one F before the white bird. And so that didn't work for us. We tried it once. They are really clumsy, just like the white bird. So this is plump, it's beautiful, and the hens, the hens will roam almost as far as the egg layers would. The males don't, because they like to be, the boss. And so they screw up the whole thing because we can't make the paddocks bigger because of the males, Corn is the other annual crop. They gave us incredible sized corn. I have a corn cob that I took my hand and it goes all the way from here, all the way to the top. I kept the cobs after I chucked it because people weren't believing that.
So is the corn harvested for grain?
Well, you can. We don't because I want tortillas out of them. My chickens are not that important to me to feed them my corn. These are the hazelnuts in the corn alley crop. And then we started harvesting hazelnuts and it just went wild. the amount of production we're getting and the size of the hazelnuts. And then the biomass, of course, from those stems, which can be turned into biochar. We did that as well. Yes?
How do you harvest the hazelnuts?
Oh, we do it by hand now. But there is a machine, it's a blueberry picker, a modified blueberry picker. It's just too expensive for the size of operation we have. Eventually, we'll probably look into that. The problem with machines, though, just so you know about it, is that whenever you put machines into spaces, most machines are designed for monocultures. And so, actually, the machine efficiency kind of goes down as you think of the efficiency of productivity with combined species that can give you better quality product. And so creating biomes underground is critical for productivity to happen efficiently. And that can't be done on the basis of monoculture, whether it's a perennial crop or annual, doesn't matter. Monocultures are monocultures. You know? And so
to me, a guy as smart as you could train his chickens to pick
actually, we tried. No, but here's the thing. Chickens don't eat hazelnuts. And you know what? You can't train an animal to do something he's not interested in doing. On the other hand, though, just wait for this, we are going to probably be the first, and this is only possible because we are ahead in the hazelnut deployment. We'll be the first to produce Iberico pork, real Iberico pork in the United States. And the reason, because they will harvest the hazelnuts. And they will crack them, and they don't bury them like the squirrels. So, go home knowing this one. Not only is the chicken part of the dinosaur family, a chicken is only happy if you got a jungle. Don't talk about pastured chicken again. Listen. So this is what a day looks like in the life of a chicken in our system. You know, hanging out there under the canopy, scratching around. You know, where there is no perennials, we put the sunflowers, and underneath there is a really large amount of organic matter for them to, you know, go around, scratch, bathe. They clean up. But when a hawk comes around, you know, there is enough canopy, so they just run around, and they can technically just duck under, you know, and take cover. And then, boom, if you're a hawk, you're screwed here. You don't get our chicken. Yeah, they know how to get away from the hawk that way. So again, you know, the canopy may not be as perfect as we would like it, but this is as good as you can get if you're a chicken. So.
Do you have any experience with eagles?
Oh yeah, we have like 4 eagle nests within like half a mile and 2 miles from us, and they come around. They go right for the neighbor's chickens.